Hello and welcome to another edition of BasiliCAST, the Basilica's new podcast where we talk about the teachings of the church, we talk about spirituality, the tradition of our Catholic faith, but also modern Catholic discipleship and how we live out these beautiful and at times challenging teachings. And we're here with Rachel and Joe, and maybe you could just tell our parishioners and friends a little bit about who you are and your background. And really, it's wonderful to have you both here.
Sure. I can start us off. Thank you, Father Daniel, for having us. This is a conversation that's near and dear to both of our hearts. And just by way of introduction, my name is Rachel Holmes. I come to this work from both an academic and a personal passion. I'm a trained urban forester, which means that I do whatever I can to protect trees and green spaces in urban environments. But I studied production forestry, but also have a background in divinity. So very excited to be here. Thanks.
Great, Rachel. And Joe.
Hi, Father. I'm Joe Fargione. I am married to Rachel, and we're parishioners here, and happy to talk with you. In my professional life, I have a doctorate in ecology, and I work on, one of the things I work on is solutions to climate change.
Great. Well, that's where we really want to begin. And what we're doing today is we're going to talk about the church's teaching on environmental stewardship. We're going to talk about climate change, the Pope's encyclical, really groundbreaking encyclical Laudato Si. I'll talk a little bit about a recent conference I was really privileged to attend. And then we're going to talk about what are practical ways that we can be more environmentally conscious and that we can do our part to not only raise awareness with regard to climate change and environmental degradation, but also how we can really enter into a lifestyle that's consistent with good stewardship. I'll just start off by saying I've been heartened that Christian communities have come to a greater sense of really understanding that this is our duty. This is God not only gave us the earth as a gift, but also gave it to us with responsibility and with humility to understand that we are called to steward the earth, to till and to keep the soil as we not only the soil but the earth, to till and keep the earth and all that's in it, and we've been given a particular responsibility. One word about Laudato Si, a sprawling document, theologically rich. It has a Pope Francis sort of style. It also is Ignatian in the sense that it invites discernment and our all the ways that we're called to embrace this really pressing existential issue of climate change and environmental degradation, and that what is the wisdom of the Christian tradition, the wisdom of St. Francis, this great lover of all of creation, who really had a preternatural relationship with nature, really unseen to that degree in the Christian tradition. Is there any part of the tradition, the Christian tradition, or the scripture that really you would like to highlight as kind of foundational? And then we'll get into Laudato Si and what Pope Francis is trying to do.
Certainly, I think probably the most noteworthy biblical passage in the environmental conversation is, of course, Genesis in chapter 1, particularly verse 26, and the word dominion. And it's interesting because that one word really put the religious environmental movement on the map. It was actually evangelicals, and particularly Evangelical Environmental Network, that first reflected on that word and how we've perhaps been misinterpreting it throughout the ages. That it doesn't mean, dominion does not mean domination,
Right.
It actually means stewardship.
Right.
And so I think that piece in and of itself really is a good starting point for conversation around what it means to be a person of faith and be respectful and mindful of our job as a steward of the garden.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think certainly for centuries that was misinterpreted. misinterpreted in terms of like a license to just use in any way that we deem put. And Pope Francis and Pope Benedict the 16th before him said the church really comes at this teaching on environmental stewardship between two extremes. One is an anthropocentric view that we are the center of all of creation. Now we're the crown of creation. We are taught that and told that, but with that comes responsibility that we're set apart in terms of being able to be gifted reason and the capacity to worship God. But all of creation praises God. All of creation is good in itself, not just in terms of our use of creation, but rather has an intrinsic value and worth. And so I love, Rachel, that you started us there talking about this, really careful analysis of what dominion entails and what it doesn't and what it's contrary to. So, Joe, any thoughts in terms of kind of rooting our conversation biblically?
I like that in addition to that recognition of the intrinsic value, it also talks about our duty to each other and to future generations, and how we are degrading the earth to the point where it's really impacting people's lives and health, and in particular the poor and the most vulnerable are the ones that suffer the most. And so this is another way, in addition to its intrinsic value of caring for creation, but caring for each other requires that we also take care of this earth that everyone depends on.
Right, and that's such an important dimension of Catholic teaching in terms of Catholic anthropology or theological anthropology, that we're social creatures, right? The Greeks understood this, Aristotle, that we are meant to live in community, and therefore there are rights and duties that flow from our human dignity. And there's a great part of Caritas in Veritate and then Laudato Si, which introduces an emerging principle of Catholic social teaching. So we have the principle of solidarity, but both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis teach that solidarity has an intergenerational dimension to it. And so Francis refers to it as intergenerational justice. Benedict refers to it as intergenerational solidarity, but they're both really the same thing, that we owe, as Joe said, future generations the right to a habitable environment that is sustained and that is in accord with their own human dignity and the dignity that creation has. Different than the human person, but related because it's created by God with its intrinsic value. And I think that's such a clarion call to Christians and people of faith and people of goodwill, that the world and environment we leave our children is our duty, and they're right. And that really calls forth a certain behavior from us, and really a soul searching. I want to move to the topic of Laudato Si. So, two of the primary, really central issues that Pope Francis has taken up is environmental stewardship and climate change and immigrants. These have been really two focus points for him, in addition to all other issues, certainly poverty, the globalization of indifference, which he talks about often. But he really demonstrated incredible leadership near the beginning of his pontificate. It was the first encyclical that he released. He clearly saw it pressing in terms of time. He did it ahead of the Paris Accords, the climate accords, to try to marshal global attention and global will to really bring us to the sense that there's something wrong. So the beginning of the document really names the harm. And it says, here's the state of our world: the lack of water, decreasing water, the lack of the effect on biodiversity, the effect on the poor. So right now, not even future generations, but right now what we know is the poor suffer disproportionately from environmental degradation. And it leads to migration. It leads to despair. And it really invites us to ask the questions of why But I want to just start with that document. The Vatican knew that there was going to be pushback, including from more conservative quarters in the church, and there was. There was actually, before it was even promulgated, there was a media campaign against it. So thinking that this was somehow a deviation from the Christian tradition, when it's very much at the heart of Catholic social teaching. As Rachel noted, I think very well, this has been a positive development in ecological stewardship from a Christian vantage point. But any thoughts on that document? I mean, when you saw that it was released, what did you think as a Catholic? I mean, here this new Pope is releasing his first encyclical on the environment and taking global leadership in a way that really was unparalleled at that point.
Well, I can say, I mean, remember when it came out around almost 10 years ago. I just remember, so Joe and I was previously working for the Nature Conservancy, which is where Joe currently works, and I just remember my colleagues being very surprised. And it was a really proud moment to be Catholic and to be able to say that our world leader, the top of our institution, the top of our faith, is making this a priority. It felt really good, not only to be able to own being Catholic, but also to say, like, you know, I felt personally justified in the work that I had been taking up to try to do. And just, you know, one of the things that I think is so critical in the document itself is the love of neighbor goes hand in hand with the love of nature.
Yes.
And that is something that I hope we can maybe touch on a little bit, which in the environmental movement, we're sort of prone to this us and them mentality. But you know, fundamental to our ability to change the way we think about the world and change the way we act towards nature is the need to see the other human as part of ourselves and part of the greater communion of God. So, but yeah, 10 years ago when it came out, I just remember people calling me and being like, "Did you see that thing?" And I'm like, "Yes."
Right.
Yeah, I did. So.
And there were a lot of non-Catholic, non-religious leaders who read it. It was meant for the entire community, global community, and it really had an effect on people, and it was a proud moment, I think, in terms of, you know, the Catholic teaching. But as you note, Rachel, it is very much located within Catholic social teaching, which sees that we are called to be in right relationship with God and neighbor. And I was recently at a conference, brought about 80 people together in California on Laudato Si. It's called the Way Forward movement. This is the third iteration where we take up a pressing issue. And I was so impressed with who was gathered, scholars and theologians and priests and bishops and a number of cardinals. And there was beautiful commentary on the connection between Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, so the document on fraternal love and charity. And one of the you know, bishops who was preaching said that no social good will find sustainability without love and mercy. The two go hand in hand, and I appreciate your connection of the two, because what they said is Laudato Si has to be read through Fratelli Tutti, and Fratelli Tutti has to be read through Laudato Si to see the unity of those teachings. Joe, wondering, I mean, you're an ecologist, so, you know, and also a Catholic, so you have the Pope, you know, releasing this document in 2015, trying to move, you know, this conversation in a particular way and global, marshaling that global action. What did you think?
Well, it was very inspiring to see him raise this issue to such a prominent level, and you know, it's the encyclical. It's long. There's a lot in there,
Right.
and so I think he showed an impressive grasp of the topic. You know, as a scientist, it's nice to see that he's really paying attention to all the aspects of this and making a lot of connections. There's also, you know, there's the theological basis, and there's also just a lot of pragmatic pieces and wisdom in there.
Mhm.
And he talks about, as you noted, these sort of two divergent views. That some people are sort of technological optimists, where like, oh, we'll figure it out. Don't worry, progress happens, and this is just part of progress, and there's nothing to worry about. And then the other side that nature's good, and humans mess everything up, and humans should just be separate. And neither of those are very helpful. There's, we need. Yes, on the one hand, it's a technological problem, and there will be technological solutions to stopping climate pollution. But that it's also will only happen when people realize that making those changes and doing so are consistent with our values,
right.
And whether that's your values as a Catholic or as a human. And so I think highlighting for people what those values are. That will lead us to be intentional about stopping climate pollution. And he mentions Catholic values, but I think the values that he mentions are pretty universal. So
Right.
It was great that it really was, as you said, intended for the global community.
Yeah, and accessible.
Yeah.
One of the things I like about Pope Francis is he has a very folksy way of speaking and writing. And, people he uses evocative phrases. One of the things that was remarkable about the document, and I think really helpful, is that he didn't just come with the wisdom of the different popes and successors. He turned to the various Episcopal conferences and scientists, and he himself, that was his background. He was a scientist in university before he felt the call to priesthood. So he obviously has a very able mind and a good theological mind, but also a good scientific mind. But he's relying on these Episcopal conferences in places where they really struggle disproportionately with environmental degradation, and reading the signs of their experience, or the signs of the times, which is from the Second Vatican Council. In Gaudium et Spes, the Church is called to be alive to the signs of the times. And as Pope Francis has said often, that reality is more important than ideas. So the reality of struggle and environmental degradation, let's be alive to that and not put our heads in the sand, and then respond with values, Joe, as you were saying, that everybody can apply. The document is ponderous. It would sound negative, so I'm not going to say it's ponderous, but it's sprawling. I would say, for those who don't want to read the entire encyclical, Pope Benedict has in Caritas in Veritate, and I believe, because I've taught it for 10 years in my Catholic social thought course to my law students, I believe it's sections 48 through 52. It's a crisp, beautifully reasoned defense of ecological stewardship from a theological prism, but also gets into a lot of the practical issues and the call for ecological conversion. And it references intergenerational solidarity. It references the need to change lifestyles. It connects it to the consumerist culture that drives so much of this. And it's really well done. Benedict was referred to the Green Pope. Rachel, I noticed you're wearing your green blazer, which has gotten us into a good setting for this conversation. But I would also note Caritas in Veritate's contribution to this, and that John Paul II was also very strong on ecological stewardship, and Paul VI in the 1970s. So I had an opportunity to teach international law students on environmental sustainability, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But I'm going back doing all this research and really a deep dive into the Church's wisdom. And Paul VI was an amazingly prophetic voice in so many ways, but he had an unbelievable quote from the 1970s. So Francis is going to lay leaders, theologians, scientists, Episcopal conferences, predecessors, people outside the Catholic tradition to really marshal all that is very helpful in terms of the wisdom. I like the fact, Joe, that you stretched out, articulated two extremes to avoid. We talked about the extremes of anthropocentrism and neopantheism. And neopantheism is that, everything is God, and doesn't make the distinction that everything in terms of nature is just like God, and not making proper distinctions in terms of creator and created order. And I'm not a theologian with a D at the end of my name. So if I need to be corrected by theologians, I'm happy to have that happen. But then the other extreme that you note is between this view that humans just need to get off the planet because we're destroying it so much, and if we weren't here, all would be well, and the extreme that we can fix this. I had a relative close to me who's bright, and I'm not going to call him out by name, but he said, well, God will show us the way. He said, God would not give us a snake. The world is not a snake. And my response to him, lovingly, was, we've created the snake. God gave us a gift, and we created this thing that has been imperiled and is imperiling our own dignity and future generations and the poor because of our use of it. God gave us this gift, and then, as Rachel noted, stated to the tilling is to work with it, the keeping is to sustain it, and the dominion is in accord with biblical stewardship. But if we act and use this gift in a manner deleterious to the nature itself, it has its own language, which Pope Benedict says, a grammar that tells us how we should use it. But one quick thing, and I would like you to see what you would say in terms of commentary. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis talks about the technocratic paradigm. And he's quoting another great theologian, Romano Guardini, a German theologian. And this is the idea that technology will just be able to conquer everything. And that we don't approach things with a sense of humility and our own limited ability. And that if we put all of our eggs in the basket of technology, without the lifestyle change and the values and virtues, that will come up empty. I wonder if either of you can comment on that.
Yeah, I think that there is that middle path is that, yes, we do need, there are technological changes that will fix this, but in order to achieve them, we need to take action ourselves and be intentional about the changes that we want to see, and those are things that will carry over, both in our personal lives and in society, that will make the changes in our energy system and how our transportation, our food, and our agriculture that are causing all these emissions. That we need to change all those systems, and that those are things that we can do both in our lives and that we can work for more broadly in society.
And just to add on to that, and I'm aware that we'll have a varied audience for this conversation, and so just to put a finer point on what Joe is saying, let's talk about, emissions from energy usage. So Joe does a lot of work on renewable energy. One of his projects is to figure out where to put wind turbines so that they don't do as much damage to nature. And while we're moving towards all these energy solutions, technological energy solutions, whether it's renewable energy, we also need to have the same focus on reducing our consumption altogether. So I think that's the point here. Yes, we need these technological solutions, but then we also need to unplug some stuff, right? And that's, I think, the hard part for people, because for most of us in our adult, or at least since we've all been alive, there have been technological advances almost across the board in medicine, even in the clothes we wear, in the cars we drive. And so it's just a natural predisposition to think someone's going to be smart enough to engineer a solution to that. Right. So we don't have to worry about what we're actually consuming, but we actually do.
Yeah, no, really good points, both of you. And sometimes we want the easy way around when the way, from a Christian standpoint, that we're called to is to die to self, and that every comfort shouldn't necessarily be at our fingertips. Or to connect with what you said, Rachel, sometimes we need to unplug ourselves from the consumerist society, from the fact that we're always seeking comfort. I think comfort and consumption as idols go hand in hand in our American life. We had a theologian who is at St. Thomas University in the Catholic Studies area, and I remember he gave a talk on Laudato Si early on at Our Lady of Lourdes, where I was pastor, and boy, he really said we got to get to the root causes. I think some of the root causes are spiritual. I think without that life-giving relationship with God, we are seeking to fill a void, right? And we're going to seek the comfort of this world. We're going to live for this world. And so then we consume more and more. Our economy's set up that way. And he saw that connection between poverty, consumption, comfort, consumerism, and environmental degradation. And so I think we're invited to really look within ourselves. I want to just ask from your backgrounds, what got you into your particular areas? How did you come to love the environment and love this cause, and to there's got to be a backstory for each of you.
Well, I can go quickly, at least I hope quickly. So when I was in forestry school, so many of my colleagues had these really romantic stories of engagement with nature, but mine was very different. I grew up in a city in New Jersey called Clifton. Shout out to Clifton. And on my street, this was, a very long time ago, we'll just say that, they were resurfacing the roads. And so at the time, folks there wasn't a lot of knowledge around how to root prune. So the answer to resurfacing the road was to take out all the trees on my street. So I just remember that day, I think I was maybe in the 5th grade. They didn't warn us, they didn't tell us, so they just systematically started at one end of the street and started taking out all the trees. And I went outside and started yelling at the guys that were taking the trees down. And so my mother, in her infinite wisdom, was like, I don't want my daughter to get, hurt. So she took me away for the day, which, I think she did the best she could. But what happened was I left with a tree-lined street in the morning and came back to nothing. And I just remember everything. I mean, it was hotter and dirtier, and it was just so sad to grow up without having access to trees or really having a green neighborhood like we know is really most healthy for people today. So that was what sort of inspired me, and then also having the opportunity to work on my aunt and uncle's ranch in Colorado. So I had this juxtaposition of very urban nature, and then this more wild nature, which is sort of what drew me to wanting to take care of and make sure that people living in cities have access to the things I did.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Joe, how about you?
I grew up in Minneapolis, and I spent some time going up to the Boundary Waters and canoeing around in the wilderness. And I really fell in love with that landscape. And something a friend of mine said, about why he loved spending time in wilderness is, you're seeing things most people don't get to see. It's beautiful, it's relaxing, all these things. And he said, what I love the most is that you think different things than you would, when you're in our busy, hectic lives. And so there was and I thought that was really interesting. So there's the value. There's the aesthetic value and the intrinsic value, but there's also that benefit it gives to us that's a little hard to describe. That's an internal experience that we have that puts us in a more contemplative space and is healing.
Yeah.
So that so I really enjoyed that, and I thought I'd like to do something that helps preserve places like this.
Well, that's beautiful. And part of the reason I was prompted to ask the question is what was from this recent conference experience. And one of the speakers said, if you ask somebody in this area of being an ecologist or a conservationist, is they usually had some experience powerfully in their younger years with the beauty of creation and nature. And so that's true in each of your cases, but also, Rachel, to your comment about the harm of deforestation, for lack of a better word, but taking down trees.
Sure.
when I go up to, I have a place in northwestern Wisconsin, about 2 hours from the Twin Cities. And when I go up there, it's quieter, the air is pure, it's about 7 degrees cooler, not only because it's northwest of here, but because it's not a concrete jungle.
Mhm.
But also, to your comment, Joe, it also provides an opportunity for me to, in long walks, to think more, to let the Spirit be present. I'm one with nature, I'm one with God, and it's just it's a powerful experience. And I think we need more and more of those opportunities as people of faith and other people, people who might not describe themselves as people of faith, to be one with nature and to really understand that intrinsic value.